Hello and welcome to the Beniverse, and thank you for tuning back into this week's Power Rankings, where we are talking the Oscars leading up to the 2023 ceremony. And today we are talking the category of Best Adapted Screenplay. This is a category that is not as competitive as other categories. I think, for instance, like Best Supporting Actor, I think there's a lot of people who have a legitimate case for making this. In my opinion, there's not that as much right now in the race. There are some films that have been doing quite popular. There's other films that it just doesn't feel like they're in any real form of contention. I brought out 16, I believe. Yes, 16 picks. Maybe 17, one that I'll talk about that I don't know how to put it in there because I'm not hearing anything about it. But how Power Rankings work, I go throughout the year. So I give an objective, as much as I can, opinion about these movies. For basically, 75% of the movies here on this list, I haven't gone to see them. There have been a few that I have gone to see, but for the most part, I'm going into most of these movies blind. How I try to make it objective is, how does the Academy Awards typically nominate films? What films do they typically go after? What is popular with their crowd? What is going to be pleasing for Hollywood? Basically, what's kind of Oscar baity? It's a term that I don't necessarily want to use, but when you're prognosticating, it's just what you have to do. And this is not going to be a finite list. This is not me nailing down my predictions. Most of these films are going to depend on larger receptions. There's one film that is in my top 3 for basically what I think is a sure thing nomination. And when it premieres at New York Film Festival in like a month, if it's bad, then it falls off the list really easily. There's other films where it's just like, I feel like no one's talking about it, but then all of a sudden, if it has a little bit of a resurgence, like Coda did last year, when it ended up winning Best Adapted Screenplay, and for one, just getting nominated, there's a chance that films like that are going to get rewarded that I'm just unaware of right now, or haven't put any precedent onto right now, or just haven't been paying attention. So with that all said, and I realize I used the word precedent wrong there. I think what I was more meaning to say was that there was no real idea that this could happen, and there's no prelude of knowledge suggesting that that was going to happen this award season. Everything's so random. Everything's going to get just shift around. Films that are popular right now, maybe they got a pretty good critical reception at whatever film festival they had. They haven't gotten the social media, the social media narrative maybe working against it. You don't have the Oscar narratives working against it, where some of the studio heads are kind of pushing each other's movies down with the idea of like, okay, well, if we tear down this movie, this other movie will be lifted up. But if you're a fan of sports, you know what a power ranking is. I go from my least likely to what is the most likely based on, again, subjective opinions. I have to go in this. I grade each category out of 1 to 5, and based on the averages, I do this all on Excel, and based on the averages, I get what is left, and I just calculate the numbers. Some of the numbers are going to change, and so let me break down the categories first for you. The first category is noisiness of the film. Is this film going to be either a film that is talked about, that has a lot of press around it? Is it a big money maker film? That all plays into a factor. Oscars are about movies, but they also want to be, There is a want for it to be popularized, and with ratings, there's been more of a push to make sure that the films that are being represented maybe are all more encompassing. Now, we're not seeing that necessarily over the board with the criticisms of the past few years with, superhero films. Why aren't they getting nominated even though they're the biggest films of each year? So, but there is a little bit. A film like Dune last year in 2021, that was a noisy film for its, relative, the amount of people who got to see it. When Lord of the Rings wins, that's a noisy film. Titanic. Other films, even like Joker, which got nominated a few years ago, which may be a bad example because it's a comic book movie that does get nominated. But it's films like that when they get in there, it's a noisier film to have nominated, especially compared with the competition. It's a film basically more than like a handful of like really dedicated movie fans have seen. This is probably the one that your more casual movie fans have like, oh yeah, I've heard of that film. That's like a big film out. Or that's a film that is connecting with a large audience. Maybe it's making a good amount of money. That's noisiness of film. Graded on a scale of 1 to 5. Ooh, sorry, I'm getting a little out of breath already, and I haven't even started my categories. The next one is Oscar Darling. This is simply, is the person who wrote the film for the best adapted screenplay, are they in a good position to get nominated based on their prior history? There's directors on here, like whenever Tarantino writes a script, there's always just a good chance he's going to get nominated. Maybe the same with the Scorsese. Maybe the same with a good director who's going to be on here in a few, with Noah Baumbach. You know, there's these writers that just whenever they write something, it always just feels like they're going to have some buzz around them. And if they have some prior wins, that might put them higher. If there's someone that's like the Meryl Streep of this category, that might put them like at a 5. The most famous of writers are going to be a 5. The people like Gerwig, not Baumbach, you know, just the step belows, they'll be 4s and then kind of go on from there and there based on their history with the Oscars and the fame. And Aaron Sorkin, again, a 5 because he's one of the biggest Hollywood writers. Next one is genre. This is just typically, is this a film that the Academy chooses to recognize? Is it a film that usually fits within their genre? Obviously, period pieces. A film that is dramatic. A film that has something to say about society. Maybe it's a real life story. Those are genres that they go after. They don't typically go after huge sci-fi action movies. They don't go after superheroes. They don't go after really broad like comedies. There's stuff like that where it's just like that could play against them. These next two categories are a little bit contentious. And I will admit, in future shows when I'll be talking about original screenplay, I am going to get rid of them. Let me grab a drink of water real quick. I am going to get rid of these categories or / rework them. One category that I have is called True Story / Movie About Hollywood. That is the film either a true story or is it a film about Hollywood? Because Hollywood always loves films about itself and they are a sucker for true stories. If it fits one of those two criteria, it's in. The next category is a period piece. What I did in the future for original screenplay is I actually combined true story movies about Hollywood period piece into one category. I then reworked the numbers for this show and saw that it didn't really affect any of the rankings on this list except one movie, which ended up getting a bump because of this change. I'll point out that movie when we get there. But yeah, that's on a scale of 1 to 5. In the future, it's just going to be true stories, movies about Hollywood, period piece, some form of a big category. The next one is socially conscious. Does this movie have something really important to say or something that could be perceived as something that should be rewarded just for the type of movie that it is and what it is talking about, whether it's the subject matter? You see films like this kind of get that narrative each year. This is not necessarily a pro or bad thing. I'm not saying like, oh, well, you know the Oscars are going to go for this film because it's about a black person. That's not what I am saying. Like, that is not what I mean by anything, and I don't think that's a pro or negative. But there is a type of film where the Oscars choose to reward this film because it's so, quote-unquote, socially conscious. It fits more of the younger demographic that has been moved into the Oscar conversation. It has basically something larger to say about society. Oscar films love that. The next category I have is word of mouth. Does this film seem to have a good buzz going on right now? Is there a lot of fanfare for this movie? Are people going to go out of their way to support this movie as a fan, as a critic, and then most importantly as a voter? But if you get those groups kind of rallied behind it, it's going to get more people to see it. So word of mouth is essentially that. Is there a lot of people just kind of a groundwell support that makes sense? The narrative, this one is also just based on the idea of if this film ends up getting nominated, could we see it in any meaningful way having a strong story going into the Oscar nominations? Maybe it's like the example I use is when Sam Rockwell wins in 2017 for Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing, Missouri. The story around him was he is a great supporting actor who has been a great supporting actor for years, and now he has a role that is worth nominating and worth winning the award. Maybe an even better example is in 2019 where Joaquin Phoenix wins for Joker, maybe what most people wouldn't consider the best film that he's done or his best performance. But it's the film where it's finally like, he's given us this film. He's done this Paul Thomas Anderson film. He did Johnny Cash. Like, there's been so many times where we could have and maybe even should have rewarded him that he's due. That this is a good time to get it. He's an actor that deserves it. Same like Leonardo DiCaprio when he wins with The Revenant. Is there a story that basically fits in and is kind of a feel-good story? Brendan Fraser's having that this year with The Whale, a movie that we'll talk about soon. But with that all said, let's get into the categories. I have 16 movies that we will be discussing, so let's jump into the first one, which is the film Pale Blue Eyes, which is directed and written by Scott Cooper. For those who do not know Scott Cooper's work, this is a filmmaker who has made such films as Crazy Heart, Out of the Furnace, Hostile, Black Mass. He's never been nominated for an Academy Award. This film will star Christian Bale, and the film is described as a gothic horror film, which is set in 1830. It is a veteran detective investigating a series of murders at U.S. military academies in West Point, New York. And he is aided by a cadet at the school who is Edgar Allan Poe. From my understanding, this has no real basis on an actual true story. This film premieres on December 23rd and then will be released on Netflix on January 6th. So let me break down some of the numbers real quick. You can see the numbers on your screen. Noisiness of film 1, Oscar Darling 1, genre 2, true story / movies about Hollywood 1, period piece 5, socially conscious 1, word of mouth 1, narrative 2. I'll go actually a little slower because I realized I also have audio listeners. Noisiness of film and Oscar Darling both being 1. I haven't heard anything about this film. I don't even know if it's actually confirmed to be coming out. With the film making its release technically in January 6th, that kind of feels like a little too late to have a huge Oscar push. I know there are films that always get released at technically the end of the year, and then they have their qualifying run in like December 25th in like 1 or 2 theaters, but they actually really release in January. This could be the case of that. Seems a little late to make like a huge push. Haven't heard of it premiering at any festivals. There's been no trailer, so there just hasn't been any buzz. And Scott Cooper is not a director that has ever been nominated, so there's not like he has any real love with the Academy, even though he's made some really good films. Crazy Heart would be the only case to maybe pushing him up to a 2 because Jeff Bridges wins, but that film goes overlooked for screenplay. Genre, I mean, it's a horror gothic film. Doesn't really feel, but if it has a little bit of that mystery, bones to it, I could see it getting like a 2. True story movie about Hollywood doesn't seem to be based on any form of a true story. I gave it a 1. Period piece, it does have that going for its favor, so a 5, and that's again where maybe this movie's a little overinflated because of that 5. Socially conscious, though, doesn't seem like anything in there. 1. Word of mouth, nothing about this film. 1. The only narrative and the reason I gave the narrative for this film a 2 is because maybe this film is great. And then everyone's like, you know what? Scott Cooper has been delivering great films for the past 10 years. Hostile was really well beloved. Black Mass, maybe a little less so, but like Out of the Furnace is well respected. Crazy Heart wins Jeff Bridges the Oscar. Maybe there's that narrative where it's just like, you know what? Scott Cooper has been making great films in Hollywood for the past like decade plus. Now it seems like the appropriate time to nominate him for a film like this. So there is a narrative that I could see potentially breaking out if this film is good. It just feels like this film's going to come out so late. There's no buzz about this film right now that I just don't see it in any meaningful way breaking out. But again, That's why it's the last. That's why it's 16th on this list. But if this film is good, if there's a bit more, if there's a bit more of a push, if we start hearing more, maybe it premieres at New York Comic Con, or maybe it premieres at another festival in like November, we just start hearing more about it. Maybe this film ends up just climbing up the ladder. But right now it's number 16, bottom place. Next one is the movie The Batman. And I should just note we have a few movies that have an average score of 2.125 after calculating all their numbers together. For the noisiness of the film, I gave The Batman a 4. This is a very successful film that grossed $770 million this year. In terms of Oscar darling, this film I gave technically a 2. Matt Reeves has been a very prolific director in Hollywood, specifically below the lines with his special effects work. And Peter Craig is a director that hasn't done much of notice, except like The Town was a very well-received movie. Then he does Mockingjay and Bad Boys for Life. But he was also involved with Top Gun Maverick. They're both names in Hollywood, so I wouldn't fully go saying that they are a 1. They are people who have worked specifically with the crafts guilds, which I think could really bolster them, where it's just like, well, look how impressive this film is as a craft. It's a story about Batman, which automatically makes it a little bit more popular, maybe not necessarily an Oscar darling, but it puts it at a little bit more of the types of films, superhero films that win Oscars or even get nominated. There's a good track record of that being Batman-related stories with Joker and with The Dark Knight, and weirdly enough, with 2016 Suicide Squad winning best like makeup and hairstyling. Like there is this trend that like the Oscars, like that seems to be a spot that they're willing to give comic book movies as a Batman movie. So maybe it has a little bit, but that's why it's at an Oscar darling too. Genre, this film is at a 3. It's again a superhero film, but it definitely plays a little bit more like a murder mystery film, a little bit easier digestible, something that maybe a person who's not a fan of a superhero film is going to gravitate more towards. I think there is ideas of corruption in this film. It plays very much like a Fincher film at times. I kind of just milled it out where superhero films don't really tend to get nominated a ton, but these other films that it's kind of replicating kind of the noir feel, they do get nominated every so often. So it's like it's somewhere in the middle at a 3. True story movie about Hollywood and period piece, both 1, self-explanatory. Socially conscious, wouldn't exactly call this film socially conscious. It's not like it has a particularly diverse cast. It's not like it has a very focused message on capitalism. Like there are ideas of that, of the attack and what the cruelty of capitalism can have on its people, but it's not even something as blatantly and I think as bad as Joker is, where Joker has this idea of like socially conscious, where it's like playing like, well, this is what the downtrodden have. And I think that movie does that poorly, but it is still a socially conscious message, or at least it tries to be so. Maybe I need to define this category a little bit more, but you know what I'm trying to say. Word of mouth 3, well-received movie, well-liked movie. Like I said, grossed a ton of money. There's definitely some love for this movie and a lot of respect towards this movie. But in terms of narrative, I just don't see it being anything strong. You know, it's come out in March. You haven't really been hearing this film buzzed about like other films that came out in March, like Everything Everywhere All at Once. This doesn't feel like a film that has the narrative of like, this is an important comic book movie to get recognized. You had Black Panther, which had an all-black cast, one of the biggest films domestically of all time, an audience that came out to it. It was the pinnacle kind of the MCU, building up to Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame. It just felt like this great capping point. You know, we've now had films like Logan. We had Joker. We've obviously, like I said, had Black Panther. We had The Dark Knight. There's all these films that did end up getting nominated. So it's like, okay, so the Batman doesn't even have that necessarily to go on, where it's like, well, this is the one that feels undeniable. It's like, okay, you could say that, but I also just don't think in any real meaningful way it does. So that's why the word of mouth, and or more specifically, the narrative's at a 2, averaging this film at a 2.125 and being in 15th spot. Number 14 also has a 2.125. I gave the word of mouth a little bit stronger on this one, where the word of mouth has been so positive and there has been a lot of love towards this movie. It's at a 99% Rotten Tomatoes. It's at an 8.0 on IMDb, which that's you need to take that with a critical eye because, it's a much smaller film, much smaller budget. Less people have gotten to see this film, not even seen this film, have sought out this film, so maybe they're not going on to IMDb. They're not review bombing this film in any way, but it is still a film that has been well liked by critics and audiences alike, and that is Marcel the Shell with Shoes On from A24, screenplay by Dean Flesher Camp, Elizabeth Holm, and Nick Paley. Noisiness of the film, I gave it a 3. Again, a film that was very well received, very big amongst film people, basically on film Twitter. That's what the audience is. People who were aware of the property, of the IP, who were fans of the YouTube skit, they were there for this. So that's like a 3. Like, there's definitely some noise, a lot of love for this movie, but it's not like this had this huge mainstream play going for it. I know in Sacramento it only played in our indie theater for a few weeks. Oscar darling, there's nothing here. One genre, there's a chew. It does have this really sweet family story about loss, about moving forward. Like I said, about family. There are some beats in there that really do play at the just dramatic sides of it. True story movie about Hollywood. Wouldn't exactly call this, but it is a film about filmmaking in the documentary format. So I could definitely see calling it a 1 seems completely non-true because, again, it does have some of these filmmaking tendencies that the Academy could award. Period piece 1, socially conscious 1. It's a movie about a shell with shoes on. I really did not like this movie, and I kind of take every chance I can to bash this movie. I get a lot of you liked it, and I completely understand that. It just was not for me. Narrative true, this does have the A24, like, this film was really well reviewed. This was a really well-loved film. This meant a lot of things to a lot of people who grew up with this project. But ultimately, A24 has, and this is why it ends up getting a chew despite those positives I had, A24 for sure already has Everything Everywhere All at Once and The Whale that they are for sure going to be campaigning for. It just feels like Marcel the Shell with Shoes On is not something they're going to really put their attention to when they have 2 legit contenders with Everything Everywhere All at Once and The Whale. Typically what you hear is the studios always have a few horses that they'll back. And maybe they have some other ones, maybe some that get a nomination here or there, but it's not going to be one that just, wins outright. They're not going to have like 5 projects because then they're diluting their not necessarily own brand, but their own chances. You promote the ones that you feel the strongest about, which this year is clearly Everything Everywhere All at Once and The Whale, as it should be. So that's why it comes in at a 2.125, a little bit better of a chance than Batman, but not a ton. And that's why Marcel the Shell with Shoes On is a 14. And get ready for 13 because we are going to the danger zone with Top Gun Maverick. Screenplay by Peter Craig, Justin Marks, Aaron Kruger, Aaron Warren Singer, and Christopher McQuarrie. Noisiness of this film's grossed $1.6 billion, so it's out of 5. This film is the biggest film of the year. It's one of the biggest films domestically. It made Tom Cruise, again, a guy who's been an A-list star, maybe now the most powerful force in Hollywood, not named Disney. Oscar darling, wouldn't really call this. The first one is a well-liked movie from the 1980s, but it's not like this film is like one that was like critically acclaimed, had all these Oscar nominations. It has a few. I know the song gets nominated, Take My Breath Away, but it's not like it has this just outright like love Oscar affairs. It's not like Top Gun is the best picture of 1986 or 85 whenever it comes out. It's not like it gets that nomination, so that isn't helping it. So it's not like this Oscar darling. It's never like Tom Cruise has been an Oscar darling. He's been nominated a handful of times. He's even had films that I think, if not win Best Picture, they are definitely in the contenders, and they're definitely, well-loved films that whether it's Jerry Maguire, A Few Good Men, Born on the 4th of July, Eyes Wide Shut, though I don't think Eyes Wide Shut ends up getting really any real nominations, but he's had films like this. This is a different type of beast. This is such a huge film that it feels like at this point a little undeniable that it isn't one of the Best Picture wins. nominees. If this ends up getting a Best Picture nominee, you could definitely see that helping out. This could be the film that has the most nominations by the end of the year, or at least up there. I'm kind of predicting at this time, if you're going over under 6 nominations, I think it's pretty easy because I think you get Best Picture and I think you'll get a few of the below the lines. If this got a Best uh, screenplay nomination, which I will admit just seems very unlikely, but it stands a chance, and that would be even bigger success and kind of, again, get younger people slash the years the Oscars always do the best in ratings is when people have seen the films that are nominated and they're in the zeitgeist. Past few years, it's like, who's seen these films? And that's been kind of the big, maybe not even criticism, because I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to reward the smallest of the films. But the more people you have, the more people are talking about the Oscars, the more likely people are going to be tuned in or following along with it online and engaging with it in a much more meaningful way, especially on social media. But with that said, Oscar Darling 1, genre 2, it has like the case for genre would be like films like Mad Max Fury Road, Blade Runner 2049, these big spectacle events, even like in 1949, not 1949, geez, 1917 or Dunkirk or Dune getting nominated. Different genres technically, but they have that same scale and scope to their direction. True story movie about Hollywood period piece 1 obviously socially conscious. Would not call this film particularly socially conscious. Doesn't have a particularly diverse cast in any meaningful way. Doesn't have this overarching story about even what war means and what soldiers come home with. It's not focused on that. That is not what the story is about. Word of mouth is a 5. This film, like I said, has had the buzz. Narrative, it's a 1. It's just like, of Top Gun Maverick getting the narrative like above a 1, you would have to make the case that Top Gun Maverick is one of the best scripts of the year. I think it's a really damn good script. I don't think people are thinking of Top Gun Maverick for the script. Obviously, you have the best director, which could very well be nominated for, because the directing kind of feels inevitable. To quote Thanos, the directing is inevitable. It's just, you see that film and you're like, that's beautifully directed. It's a best picture because of just how much it's meant to people, how big the film is, just the technological achievement, the fact that the film is so good. You have the below the lines. You could maybe even see Tom Cruise getting a little bit of a push. I kind of doubt it for best actor. It just doesn't seem like doesn't seem like best adapted screenplay is going to be one of the ones they focus on. So it's a 2.125. Maybe Top Gun Maverick does so well, the narrative keeps growing for it in such a meaningful way that not only does it get a Best Picture nomination, the below the lines, maybe this is one of those fringe categories that it gets and everyone's like, or it has a chance to get nominated in a really meaningful way come like December or January. And people are like, does Top Gun Maverick, is it one of the front runners this year? It could happen. I'm just not betting on it. So Top Gun Maverick was 13, and coming in at number 12 is the movie's Bones and All, which is the Guadagnino follow-up to Call Me by Your Name and Suspiria. This is written by David Konjanik. David Konjanik has written films for Guadagnino before, including A Bigger Splash, Suspiria. This is his 3rd film working with him. Noisiness of the film. This film came out to great reviews in Venice. Excuse me. Sorry. Oscar Darling. This film, Guadagnino had a huge film with Call Me by Your Name. This film stars Timothée Chalamet. So maybe not necessarily this guy, this David, having that Oscar Darling history, but there is certainly a lot of working on it. The fact that he can say, like, this is new film from Guadagnino, who brought you Call Me by Your Name, from the people who brought you Call Me by Your Name, that kind of just helps his name out a little bit. And again, he's a well-liked guy who has worked in this industry for a long while and has been having this partnership with Guadagnino. Oscar Darling, so that's why it's a 3. Genre 1, this is a film about cannibals. True story about Hollywood 1. Period piece 3, because it is set in the 1980s and Reagan era. Socially conscious, just because the Reagan element has been a big part of this movie. It seems like in the advertising, maybe this film has a larger message about society. what it was in the 1980s, what it looks like now, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. So I gave it kind of the benefit of the doubt and kind of gave it a 2. Word of mouth has been, here's the interesting thing. Word of mouth has been very positive for this film. It hasn't been positive in the extent of like, this is one of the best stories of the year, that, or at least that is going to get nominated for an Oscar. It's just the word of mouth has been so focused on the brutality of this film, the cannibalist aspects of this film, Timothée Chalamet's performance, how dark and weird and like gory this film is. That just doesn't, those are not buzzwords for the Academy. So I gave it a word of mouth 2. Narrative 2. I mean, like I said, even like the fact that it premiered at Venice a few weeks ago, it does feel like it's already being a little overshadowed amongst other of the films that came out in the past 2 to 3 weeks. So I think Bones and All has maybe a chance, and maybe this is again the push. Once the film actually comes out, people are really going to gravitate towards this film. Doesn't seem like a likely contender based on how the Academy chooses to nominate. I mean, not saying that they don't nominate films about cannibals. They have, obviously, most famously, Silence of the Lambs, but in reality, a cannibal love story set in the 1980s Reagan era, it's just that feels like a bridge too far for the Academy to cross when they've never indicated that that's a bridge that they're interested in crossing. So that's why Bones and All is coming in at a number 12. Number 11 is a weird film. It's The Greatest Beer Run Ever. Here's what I'll say. I made this list. I made all these PowerPoints. I made all this information before I think anyone really got to see The Greatest Beer Run Ever. This premiered at TIFF today, actually, September 14th. I believe it played this morning. This is the follow-up for Peter Farrelly for his film Green Book. Not obviously a direct sequel. It's just it's his next film post Green Book. This film stars Zac Efron. It's based on a true story of this guy who basically delivers beers to his friends in Vietnam. The reviews of this film have been fine. I haven't read anything like outright this film is horrible. I also haven't read this film is great. Peter Farrelly still has a lot of stink on him post the Green Book win, which a lot of people ended up being pretty upset about. Based on the messaging of the film, what that film was trying to say, and then finding out what we know about the Shirley's family, kind of coming out and saying this guy is not as... The Viggo Mortensen character is basically made up in how he treated him. He did not treat him as a friend in any way. So all that, it's just kind of working against it. I made this list before that film had premiered. Knowing the reviews for it, I'd probably guess that this is this 2.625 doesn't stick around. It doesn't stay anywhere higher. But before this film came out, here was the justification. Noisiness of the film. It was at a 1. The film literally will premiere, I think, like September 30th, which is in like 2 weeks, and no one's talked about it. No one had seen it. Oscar darling, you had to give it a 4 because Peter Farrelly has 2 Oscar wins. He's 2 for 2 with Green Book. Genre, it has that kind of like, you would almost maybe equate it to like a kind of fun Forrest Gump, a little bit more jokey, but has this like, maybe it's kind of serious core to it with this message about friendship. It's a 1960s war film, true story movie about Hollywood. You have to give that the 5 because it is a true story. Period pace, I gave it a 4 because, you know, it does take place during the Vietnam War. Socially conscious, I just gave this a 1 just straight up for just the Peter Farrelly of it all, and like with how badly Green Book was received, I just didn't see that the Academy wanting to follow up with another Peter Farrelly film. Word of mouth, I gave it a 2 because same thing where no one had seen this film, no one was talking about it, and now with people seeing it, they're saying it's fine, it's okay. Maybe not as either cohesive or nothing as strong as Green Book with like the performances of Mahershala Ali, maybe also nothing as downright offensive as the aspects of Green Book had, or to some. So word of mouth, I kind of gave that the 2. Narrative, I gave it a 2. Again, it's so hard to build a narrative when the film comes out in 2 weeks and no one's seen it. And now that people have seen it, they're just kind of saying, it's a movie, it's good, it's pleasant. Zac Efron's actually pretty decent in the film. That's not enough to really build a win. So that's why I have the greatest beer run ever. I always want to say the greatest beer run ever told, but that's not the title. That's why greatest beer run ever is coming in at number 11. Next to another film that I believe gets the same rating at number 10, which it does, 2.625 is the average, Noah Baumbach's White Noise. I have a lot of thoughts about this film, how this film is going to do critically. Let's just say the things that have been said about this film. Film came out at Venice, had its premiere. You saw Adam Driver getting off the boat with a full tuxedo coming out of the Venice, the boat that took him to the Venice Film Festival in a black suit. Guy looked fantastic. When does Adam Driver not look fantastic? Film premieres, one of the first earliest films at Venice to premiere. I want to say this film debuted maybe end of August even, or if not, very beginning of September. There was a lot to be said about this movie. A lot of people are praising the ambition of the film, but saying the story kind of falls apart. Some of the biting satire that the book, Don DeLillo's book, am I pronouncing that last name? Look, Don DeLillo book. I probably mispronounced it wrong again. Don DeLillo? Well, I'll just say it's that, Don DeLillo, and you can all correct me in the comments. They're all saying that it doesn't quite have the cleverness of it. It loses a film that is, again, kind of the unadaptable. Maybe it doesn't fully get there with its adaptation. You always see that the films that end up getting nominated for, like Dune, for instance, that was a story that maybe a lot of people considered unadaptable. Lord of the Rings, even like a film like, I'm trying to think even more, Power of the Dog last year is probably a pretty good example, where it's just like, maybe it's hard to capture the nuance of this book when so much of it is internal and capture it on film. And the films that are able to do that usually get a nomination. It sounds like the White Noise is a little bit too controversial, or just doesn't work for enough audiences to get at that. Noisiness of the film, though, it's a $140 million film by Netflix, starring one of the biggest stars in the world with Adam Driver, and a supporting performance from Greta Gerwig, one of the biggest directors in Hollywood. So that gives it a strong one. Oscar Darling, Baumbach's been nominated 3 times, most recently for Marriage Story, which was well loved. So you have to give him that. He's one of the biggest writers in Hollywood right now. So that's a 4. Genre 3, I think a dark satirical comedy that also explores, the destruction of Earth. You saw a film like that last year, Don't Look Up, get nominated. And that one's much more broad comedy than I think Baumbach's film is going to be. And Baumbach is a director whose type of comedy has been awarded at the Academy Awards in terms of nomination. True story about, movie about Hollywood, true story, period piece. That was all a 1 for both categories. Socially Conscious, I don't know the book particularly well. I haven't been reading, here's why I said it's a 2. Socially Conscious is a 2. I haven't been reading any reviews where they're like, this is a biting satire of like Reagan or Trump or conservative politics, or how we deal with the pandemic, or how we look at the apocalypse incoming. Like, I haven't read anything like that. Like, it's a story for the ages. So that kind of makes me think that it's not particularly, it could be, but maybe it's just not being picked up in that way. Word of mouth, true, because like I said, this film's been pretty polarizing. I've heard people who love this film, absolutely love this film, and then others who are like, this film's kind of a giant mess. Narrative of the film, though, I think it actually has a pretty strong narrative, in the case that they're going to look at it and they're going to say, Noah Baumbach is a guy that has been nominated 3 times. I believe 2 of them are for Marriage Story. He, in any year, probably would have won for Marriage Story. It just so happened that year he went up against was Parasite for director, and for screenplay, Adapted. Who wins Adapted Screenplay in 2019? I don't remember exactly who wins, but it kind of feels like one of these undeniable 2019s. I'm going to look that up real quick just to see. So who wins Adapted Screenplays? People are probably screaming at me in the video. They're like, it's obviously this one. How do you not know it? So Black Klansman's 2018. What's the year after? I always hate it because it's like the 2019 is rewarding the 2018 film. Oh, duh. Oh, my God. I'm a freaking idiot. I have it tattooed literally on my arm. Jojo Rabbit wins for Taika Waititi. Again, a film that was just so... I know it's a fairly controversial film. Oh, wait. I'm an idiot. Marriage Story goes has to be an original screenplay, so it loses to Parasite. So this whole adapted screenplay kerfuffle that I just brought up has no actual meaning. You like that? I think I just made up the word kerfuffle. That's another word that I'm trying to say that I'm just too lazy to think of. You have to understand, I've been up since 5:30 this morning and I just can't think anymore. My eyes are actually killing me. But yeah, he goes up against Bong Joon-ho with Parasite. It was a battle he was never going to win. So maybe there is a narrative of like, this guy was due for one. In any year, we probably would have given him this award. It's just that he went up against basically the biggest freight train that the Oscars has had. What? Maybe since like, it might be fair even to say pre-Lord of the Rings. Like, we might be talking like Titanic or like Silence of the Lambs. I mean, Parasite just felt undeniable, especially after you just kept seeing it win award after award. So that's why I gave narrative a 4 for White Noise, because there could be just like, you're due one, you would have won, and you're a well-respected guy. So it's at a 2.625. I think the divisive nature of the film is going to probably blow it off course. That's why it's at number 10, White Noise. Number 9 is another film that has been very divisive, and that's probably where you're going to see a lot of these films from 5 to 10 ranging, because this is where some of the films are like, okay, this is probably going to get nominated, or this very well could get nomination, but let's see what happens when the wider audience sees this and see how they respond to this film. Coming in at number 9 is the film The Sun, which is written by Christopher Hampton. This is a not direct sequel, but kind of a pseudo sequel to his 2020 film, The Father. Christopher Hampton wrote both The Father and now wrote this. He also was nominated for Atonement. And crazy to me, in the 1980s, he wins for Dangerous Liaisons. So Christopher Hampton has won 2 Best Adapted Screenplays awards and has been nominated for 1. So he's at 3. So he's a very well-liked person within the Academy. So Oscar Darling 4. Noisiness of the film, I'm hearing about a 3. There's been some good word of mouth. There's been bad. We'll get into that in a second. Genre, this is very much an Oscar-type movie about a father and a son kind of reconciling. True story movie about Hollywood period piece. All looks like one. Socially conscious. Haven't heard exactly what this film is about. But so I kind of just put it as a 2. I hadn't heard anything like this is a film about even like someone dying. I think there's some suicidal / depression stuff, so maybe that can boost it up. Like, this is a story about just the dangers and harm of suicide in younger people's lives. Word of mouth and narrative, this is where it gets interesting, and I just had to put it at a direct 3 because it's basically polarized in the middle. I'm hearing some people love this film, think the emotion completely works, think it is such a sweet, beautiful film, one that is so humanly it connects to you on just an emotional level, on an empathetic level. And then there's other people on the exact opposite scale who are like, this film is basically just emotional porn. It is a film designated to make you cry. There's nothing special about this film. It is so cynical. It is so dark. It is so depressing. Maybe some of the criticisms you've heard to like the show This Is Us on NBC when it was running. There's a group of people, one who are saying it's great, other people who are saying it's just downright bad and emotionally basically abusive towards you. So I gave it a 3. I think actually in reality, I think this film will probably trend a little bit more positive when it comes out. I have it at 9 right now just due to how the numbers worked out, with it getting a 2.625 average score. I could definitely see this one going up. This one might just fully depend on how the widescreen release of this goes and who gets the narrative running for it. Hugh Jackman has been definitely one of the front runners for this movie to win Best Actor. Does this kind of get derailed? Is he in this situation where maybe Brendan Fraser's too undeniable and it's going to be the case of like Andrew Garfield getting nominated next to Will Smith? Is Hugh Jackman the Will Smith of this year, the guy who's never won, who has been long deserving of one, or is he more the Andrew Garfield in a year where it's just there's another guy with a better story and better narrative going about? That could really determine this race, where if this film really just racks up nomination, maybe Hugh Jackman gets one, maybe the director eventually gets one, maybe Best Picture, like maybe then I could definitely see a case where it just gets a Best Adapted Screenplay. At this point, I think it's a little too low. I'm just hearing enough buzz about this movie not being particularly good and well liked, and maybe there just being some more films that are just more flashier in every way. So that is why The Sun is coming in with a 2.625 and number 9 on this list. Number 8 on this list is a film called Living, which this is that case where I also just said some films where I don't really know much about the film, it ends up just getting nominated or averaging a 3 because I just don't know exactly how to pick this movie apart or build its case up. What I will say about the film Living is it was the Sundance darling this year. It is adapted from Akira Kurosawa's film Ikura. This is a film set in the 1950s London about a bureaucrat facing a fatal illness. I believe that illness is cancer. This film stars Bill Nighy. This is directed by this is not directed. It is written by Kazu Ishiguro, who is maybe not a guy who has like this huge Hollywood background, but the reason I put him at an Oscar darling, he's one of the most critically acclaimed contemporary directors of the 20th and 21st century. So even though he has no prior like Oscar love, it is just the case of like this is a well loved writer coming in to make a film that is apparently really good. Noisiness of the film, this does not feel like it's a coda. Coda, has the buzz and is enabled. Premieres in January at Sundance at a virtual festival, and by the end of the year is able to not only get nominated for 4, but win either 3 or 4 of those awards at the Academy Awards. I think it wins 3 for 4. This doesn't seem to be that. There hasn't been this big thing about push about this movie. I haven't seen a ton of reviews about this movie. It just doesn't seem. This feels like a film that is probably going to come and go. But Oscar darlings, I made the case for a genre. It is a film about a British bureaucrat getting sick with cancer, based on a Kurosawa film that has a lot of pro things going for it. Movie about Hollywood. The fact that it's about a Kurosawa film is probably playing in its positive, so that's a 3. Period piece 4. Socially conscious 3. I mean, if it's a story about loss, finding meaning in life, dying, what your richness means, how you've treated others, how you've loved others, what it means to be rich, like all those topics, like that could be a really interesting takedown of maybe just the idea of can a rich man go to heaven, as the Bible kind of suggests. Like, I'm blanking on the verse, so please do not quote me. That is not exactly what the Bible says. That is maybe even blasphemous to suggest, but it's the idea of where your treasure is, so your heart is. So could it play on ideas like that? Could it be a really emotionally powerful film? Could it be, it's already a film based on Kurosawa? I could see it having a strong socially conscious message to it about life and death. Word of mouth, though, true, because it was like one of the biggest films coming out of Sundance. True, though, because I haven't really heard anything about it since. Narrative, it's a 3. That's, like I said, this is a well enough respected director, well enough respected writers, good enough stars, like well respected stars, I should say, not good enough. They're very talented stars, based on a very popular source material with Kurosawa. There's just enough, and it ends up averaging at a 3, which makes sense when I just don't know how to really judge this film. So Living is coming in at number 8. Coming in at number 7. This one's a really interesting one. I've talked about films where I could see them going positive or negative in their reception, and this is very much the case for The Whale. When I mentioned that some films got helped out, one film got helped out when I just removed the period piece from the average equation. This was really the film that got the boost. This was originally sitting at a 3.125, which I should just mention for audio listeners. Let me go back. Living was a 3, which I don't remember if I mentioned, but just so it's clear, Living was at a 3. The Whale, it was at a 3.125. Once I removed the period piece from the equation, it was at a 3.25. This film is written by Samuel D. Hunter, not somebody who's particularly known in any way well regards within the Academy. This is a guy who wrote the 2013 play that The Whale is based on. It is the same guy. Noisiness of the film, this has been a huge noisy film. Brendan Fraser's performance, the whole comeback narrative about this story with Brendan Fraser, the fact that people are really loving this film, and specifically Fraser's role in the film, Genre, this is a film that the Oscar eats up. They eat up their Aronofsky type films. Sometimes they eat them up. Sometimes they don't do so well. But I was more referring to the wrestler Black Swan Requiem for a Dream when I said they eat it up. But it has that going for it. It is a story about a man reconnecting with his daughter. It's supposed to be a very emotional drama. It's not based on a true story movie about Hollywood period piece. That's why I was at a 1, though, again, with period piece removing. That's why I got to the 3.25 average. Socially conscious, this is a 3 because it could have very well go two ways, and I think this is going to be how the larger crowd sees it. I think this film's actually going to play really well. What's going to happen is, my guess is the Brendan Fraser aspect of the film is going to outweigh, pun not intended, outweigh anything that the fatphobic, whatever you want to call it, the words that have been used to throw / disparage the movie. I can't say if I'm pro or against some of the film's messaging towards that. I haven't gone to see the film. I'm very excited to see the film, mainly for Brendan Fraser. But that's where it's like, okay, it has the strongness of the Brendan Fraser performance, people really eating that up, people really liking that, people just falling in love again with Fraser and just him being the most powerful, one of the guys who just feels undeniable this year for a Best Actor nomination. But then you could just have this whole thing where it's just like, does this film make fun of fat people? I've already heard I've heard some critics suggest that Aronofsky doesn't seem to have any love for this character played by Fraser, where it's almost looking down at him the whole time, where it's like kind of like, look at this like piece of crap, like look how terrible he is. He's eating his like he almost has disdain for this character. Again, I can't really comment. I've just seen some reviews maybe suggest that. So I'm putting it as socially conscious for 3 because I don't really know where else to do. It doesn't seem negative enough, but it also doesn't seem positive enough, so I just put it at the average. Word of mouth, though, has been so high on this film. Narrative, again, I think it's going to be the issue of the studio A24 is going to put all the focus on Brendan Fraser getting Brendan Fraser the nomination for Best Actor. That's where this film's attention is going to be drawn to. Maybe there's a little bit fall off with other nominations that are not related to Brendan. But I think the film has been doing so well. It seems to be like a legit critical darling that people are loving. And again, I had made this data. I had compiled all this data. I made all these photos before this film when it premiered at Venice. Or Telluride. When I think it premiered at Telluride, I had the stuff all prepared for it. And then it had its debut at TIFF, and that was also very strong. So it's just like it's doing really well at the festivals, not just one festival, but multiple festivals now. It does seem like it could go up, and that might even bump the narrative. So I kind of labeled these categories, The Whale and the next 2 movies, as 5A, 5B, 5C. And I have The Whale basically being a 5B, 5C. I have it technically less than my next film. But it very well, I think it's in a very good contention point to get the number 5 slot for Best Adapted Screenplay nomination. So it is kind of 5C, but it's technically 7 on this list if you're just going numerical. So it is averages at a 3.25, The Whale coming in at number 7. Number 6, or as like I said, kind of implied 5B, this is the film Wonder, which is a film from a writer that maybe you don't recognize the name of, but she's made one of the most popular screenplays of the past decade in Room, Emma Donoghue. This film was written by Emma Donoghue, Alice Burse, and Sebastian Lillo. This is Noisiness of the Film. Haven't heard a ton of this, but the people who have seen it have been very pro the film, especially Florence Pugh's relationship with this film as the main star. I don't know why I said relationship. Her performance in this film. Oscar darling, Emma Donoghue, I believe. I'm pretty sure she wins. If not, she's definitely nominated for Room. So that gives it a good one. She's a very popular writer. I gave it a 3. Genre, this is a movie about I don't know a ton about this movie, if I'm being honest, but from my understanding, this is a character played by Florence Pugh who goes out to this village and finds this woman who's kind of living as a miraculous. They can't explain it. She's just fasting, and it's a story about the faith and fasting and why she's doing that. It's a not a true story, but it's based on true events. So it's not like there's these true characters that exist, but the ideas of these characters, the fasting girls as they're called, do exist in history. So I gave it a 4. Period piece, it's a 5. Socially conscious, I didn't know how to rate it, so I gave it a 2. Probably could have boosted it up to a 3. But again, I just haven't been able to get really much word on this film, what it's really about, what it's talking about, what its large thematic values are. Word of mouth 3 and narrative 3. Again, some good reviews, but it's not like I heard any of the big articles like when Fablemans comes out, or like when Bardo tanked at Telluride. It's not like I've heard any of that where people are like, oh yeah, this is the best film of the year, or this is one of the worst films. I've just heard this is a really good film. And a lot of times good films don't always get nominated. It is either the most talked about films or the really good films, the great films that are just getting 10 to 12 nominations, whatever it may be. This is a one that I think is wait and see, but it's in a good place right now, with I think it being so right now in the average positive, that once this film comes out, I could see it going really positive and not really dropping down to negative. So that's why it's at 5B/6, The Wonder, at 3.375. Coming in at number 5. And this isn't even the case where I think this is going to be the 5th film nominated this year, but it is Black Panther Wakanda Forever, which is written by Ryan Coogler, who also directs the film, and Joe Robert. This is the sequel to Black Panther, one of the biggest films of all time. This film gets 7 nominations at the 2019 Academy Awards. It wins 2 of them. This is the first superhero film that gets a Best Picture nomination. This is one of the biggest films of all time. And the reason it's above Wonder and the Whale is for a few reasons. Noisiness of the film, socially conscious narrative, those are all 5s. Oscar darling, it's a 4 because of just how popular the last film was. Then it starts getting weird. Obviously, true story and period piece. This was another film that I should just mention. I think I jumped up to a 3.5 once you remove period piece, but it didn't actually change where it fell on the rankings, so that's why I didn't make the adjustment on the promo. But here's where the film gets really tricky, and this is where it could be a film that gets nominated versus a film that isn't even in contention in any way regard. Is this film good? We don't know. We're not going to really know until the end of October, maybe middle of October, whenever the press screenings start happening. If this film is as good as the first film, it then all of a sudden could have a huge narrative, and that's why the narrative's at a 5, because if Ryan Coogler can somehow pull off this film after everything that happened with Chadwick Boseman on set, not on set, before the film started shooting, his tragic loss, the death of that, being able to come forward with a movie and make something great, that's going to be held in favor of this film, especially with the COVID-19, filming this movie with the COVID-19 restraints, the whole rumors about some of the behind-the-scenes stuff with Latia Wright, all of that. Like, if he can somehow right the ship on this movie, that right now kind of seems impossible to right a ship, but that trailer is beautiful. I've talked about that trailer enough. That could definitely play in its favor for the narrative. Word of mouth, it's just at a 3 because it is one of the most talked about films coming out this year. But yeah, if this film is good, and that is a huge if, this film might be undeniable to get a nomination, especially with it probably being, at the very least, is going to be a very touching tribute to Chadwick Boseman. If it's good and a really good tribute to Chadwick Boseman, the first one doesn't get nominated. This one is in a very good place to get nominated. I don't know if it will. So much relies on it. There's so much just weird stuff going on in the MCU right now. Of any film that could overcome that and just be the winner, I feel like Black Panther Wakanda Forever has the highest chance to do so. But again, it is all based on good. Right now, it is in that 5 through 7 slot. Very well could get the nomination. This needs to be a really good movie to get the nomination, though. If it's a really good movie, I think it has the narrative. I think we'll have the word of mouth. We'll have the socially conscious. We'll have the genre. We'll have the Oscar darling. We'll have the noisiness of the film that will all be playing in favor of it and really just elevate that film to what could very well be a nomination. So that's why Black Panther Wakanda Forever is just on that fringe along with the Wonder and the Whale. If I had to predict one right now, I'm putting the Whale in at my number 5 and saying Black Panther Wakanda Forever will not be in the top 5, but it very well could be. These are the 3 films that I think will be battling out for some position of 5, 6, 7. Coming in at number 4 is a film that technically has a 3.37 tied with Black Panther, The Wonder, and The Whale, but adjusted for the period piece. So there were, I guess, 2 films in total that actually got adjusted. As I note here, it comes in at a 3.714. This is the film Glass Onion, A Knives Out Story. Here's why the film actually got boosted. Oh, actually, it's not that the period piece or anything boosted it. It's that the narrative and word of mouth of the film changed. Because again, when I made this graphics, when I was doing all my research for this, the film hadn't premiered, and then it premiered at TIFF to rave reviews. So that ended up boosting the word of mouth and narrative of this film. Glass Onion is the follow-up to Knives Out. This is written and directed by Rian Johnson, noisiest of the year. It's going to be one of the most popular films of the year by all accounts, especially with how popular the first one is, and with people even suggesting maybe this one's better than the first one. I know Edgar Wright has full-on just said that, like that he thinks this film is a better film than the first, and I've heard a lot of people who got to see the film agree with that sentiment. Oscar darling, I gave it a 3 because Rian Johnson's a very well-respected figure within Hollywood, nominated, I think, a handful of times for Emmys, and gets nominated for the first Knives Out film. It's a genre out of 4. I almost wanted to put it at a 3 because of this being a sequel to a nominated film, and I just saw with the Netflix tie-in, maybe this film doesn't do as well. But with the fact that it ended up having such positive reviews, I ended up keeping the genre at the 4. True story about Hollywood, period piece, both ones. Socially conscious, 3. I think what the first Knives Out actually does sneakily well is it does have an important story about white culture looking down on immigrants, how they perceive them, the fact that it doesn't really matter if you're left or right politically leaning. They all treated the character played by Ana de Armas the same. It's a story about affluenza. I think a lot of that, and if this film can hit those topics again, I just see it being in a fairly good place for socially conscious. Word of mouth 5 and narrative 5 because of how strong this film came out. I think it's a 4. I actually think this will repeat what Knives Out did the first time and get nominated, which is going to be the rare thing to get nominated again for a sequel. But by all accounts, if this film is just as good, if not better, it's in a great place to get nominated. So it's at a 3.714 adjusted for, I guess you could say, inflation, coming in at number 4, Glass Onion. Number 3, this is a film that I literally have no clue to do. The math suggests one thing. I don't know if I fully buy into the math. This is Blonde, which comes in at a 3.875. This film is written and directed by Andrew Dominik, who has done previous films like The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. He did films like, what was that film? Killing Them Softly. So, he's worked with Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt is he's producing this film with the Plan B studio. I don't know how to make of this film. Again, the math really does suggest one thing, probably because it's very much favoring true story and period piece and the whole Hollywood aspect of the film with the noisiness of this film. It's going to be a huge film regardless. The reviews have been... They started off really positive at Venice. Then they kind of cooled down, and now I'm seeing the backlash of it. Now, the good thing is if the film... Not good thing. The good thing for the studio campaigning for the film, if the backlash kind of happens now and further away from award season, it has a better chance of keeping the noise going, because typically what happens to the film, every film that gets nominated, it will have some form of a backlash. Is this film really good? Is this film actually of value? Is this film sexist? Is this film racist? Is this film just poorly written? All these things. I mean, Licorice Pizza has that last year. Joker obviously has that. Other films, like I remember Marriage Story just had that kind of affluenza, just like, what is this film? Is it actually just about rich white people complaining? Green Book, of course, very much had that. Uh, there's been a ton of films that have kind of faltered due to that. And that could very much be the case for Blonde, especially with what we're hearing about the movie. I think the most important thing is once we all see it is what is the side going to be. I think what is going to happen, I think there was a group of really loud people on Twitter who have been in the very beginning on social media, have made it very clear that they're not going to support this movie. I also think Twitter is completely a echo chamber, so they're only hearing themselves, so they're going to think one thing and then it probably maybe won't pan out that way. And that it just seems louder than the controversy actually is around this movie. Now, with that all said, this is an NC-17 movie about Marilyn Monroe's life. Very graphic. There's apparently scenes of abortion, fetuses being ripped out, sexual assault, rape. Ana de Armas basically being naked for the large majority of this film. There's a lot of stuff that might feel icky with this film and maybe lead people to say, is this film exploring what has happened to Marilyn Monroe, or is this rather a film that is further exploiting her and is kind of relishing in its torture? I'm going to see the film next week. I'll have my opinion on that. This has been a very divisive film, but there's no doubt that the noisiness has been a 5. Dominic's never been nominated, so I gave that a 1 for Oscar Darling. Genre, though, it's a 4. This is very much a Hollywood story about Hollywood, about one of the most famous people of all time. So that's definitely a 4. True story movie about Hollywood period piece. I gave those 4 and a 5 respectively. Socially conscious, I probably should have lowered this. I put it at a 5. Here's the thing, though, why I justified it being a 5. Socially conscious does not always mean that this has the message that people want it to have. Look at Green Book. I would have to, based on this narrative or based on how I do the calculations, it would be a socially conscious would be a 5 because it's a story about racism and overcoming racism and friendship. And it's a story starring Mahershala Ali. All that. That would give it a socially conscious. And the socially conscious category, so I can make clear, because I know it can sound really performative to label a category socially conscious where you're literally rating the film on, is it diverse enough? Is it a story about this? Is it a story about that? Whatever you want to call it. This was a category that was kind of suggested by the Academy a few years ago. I don't know if it actually ever got implemented, but it was the idea of like, okay, if a film is going to be nominated for best category, it has to fit in this. Does it have this amount of cast working on it? Is this amount of the behind the scenes, like below the line? Is it like 30% like a diverse crew? Whatever. I don't remember the exact breakdown of it, but that was kind of my thinking of adding the socially conscious category on it. But I put it at a 5 because, again, just for the fact that it's discussing these topics, whether, and I've heard that there's been allusions to the Me Too movement in this film. I've heard about like mistreatment of women in Hollywood. I've heard that it may comments on the abortion debate going on right now, maybe even though indirectly because this film was directed and written before the recent abortion ban. It's a film about exploitation. It's a woman being abused in every way possible. This is a socially conscious film in the fact that it's talking about those topics. That doesn't mean that it's talking about those topics successfully. Word of mouth, though, I'm putting it at a 4. The reviews for this film were very good. If I had to redo this, it would probably be at a 3 right now because I don't know what to make of this film's word of mouth because I've now heard a lot of people really criticizing this film, though they seem to continue to support Ana de Armas' performance. So it sounds like it's going to be a polarizing film. Polarizing films I usually have been giving a 3. Narrative for this film, again, it's at a 3 because this was the one where I did generate the polarizing. There's going to be a group of people who I think like this movie, though might understand why this film doesn't work or why the other side is maybe so upset with this film, who are calling this film exploitative garbage. I didn't know how to do this, but with those all kind of playing out, it ends up being a 3.875, and it's going to be one of the noisiest films. It's actually in a really good contention chance to get a Best Adapted Screenplay nomination. I don't think in any way in hell it wins. I think the two possible winners are really these next two films, and one of them actually feels undeniable. If I had to put a guess, and I'll say it when we get closer there, there's one film that I actually feel not only confident saying it's going to be the best adapted screenplay nomination for sure, it's probably also the winner. Coming in at number 2, though, is the film She Said, which is written by Rebecca Lenkowitz. This is a film that will be premiering at the New York Film Festival at very beginning of October. I think it's like October 2nd. Lenkowitz is a British playwright and screenwriter, well-respected, projects including Colette. And this film has a lot of word of mouth before it. I ended up giving this a 3 for word of mouth. And then I added 1 because it just kind of seems like it's the preemptive frontrunner. For those who do not know, She Said is a film that follows the journalist who report the story on Harvey Weinstein and his sexual abuse in 2017. So this is a very timely story. It's a very recent story. It has the journalism integrity that Oscar-winning films like All the President's Men and Spotlight have. So that's all playing in its favor. This film is based on a really popular book. It's about taking down one of the most famous people in Hollywood and all that. So that is all playing definitely in its favor. So that's why I have it the word of mouth. So I kind of gave it the front runner like I did last time with Best Supporting Actor. It was at a 3, and then I gave it the boost because it seems to be a front runner. Narrative, I'm giving this film a 6 because, again, it's by all means the front runner. It's such an important story. It's literally the reveal of Harvey Weinstein that kind of kickstarts the Me Too movement in 2017 and just chronicles the abuse of somebody that we all knew what he was doing in Hollywood, and a lot of people chose to be silent. It's going to deal with all that, and it sounds like it's going to deal with that in a very upfront and honest way. Noisiness of the film, though, it's at a 2 right now because it hasn't premiered at any of the festivals. We haven't heard much about it. It's not a film that's particularly going to be well advertised, in the sense that this is maybe a little bit hard of a story to sell. Oscar darling, I have it at a 1. Lenkowitz doesn't have any nominations. It's not like she's a particularly well-known writer within Hollywood. Genre, though, it's a total 5. True story about Hollywood, 5, period piece. Technically a 3, but I mean, it's probably going to be more favored in the true story, all that. Socially conscious, it's a 5. This film just seems like it has so much going for it in favor that I'm putting it at a 3.875, coming in at second place for my power rankings. Coming in at number 1 was such a definitive number 1 that not only do I think it's going to get nominated, there's no world where I don't see this film getting nominated. I also think it wins this category just straight out. And that is my number 1, Women Talking, which is directed and written by Sarah Polley. Noisiness of this film, it is a 4. I've heard a lot of positive about this film. I think it's just going to keep ramping up. These played both times Women Talking played at the festivals. It played really early on, and that could be, I think it then had the issue of then it got kind of maybe not ignored, but so many films had been coming out, you just kind of get overpowered with Spielberg making a film and the noisiness of like Rian Johnson's Glass Onion, that I think it's going to, once the film actually comes out, I think it's going to be talked about much more. Oscar darling, I put it at 3. Sarah Polley is a well-respected enough actor in Hollywood, well-respected director and writer. Her first film, I believe it's in like 9 or 10 years. Genre, 5, very much a story with the subject matter, which I've already talked about. It's basically 12 women coming together in their 1600 colony and saying, like, what do we do because all the men are sexually assaulting us, and how do we come forward? What do we do in this situation to get this situation to stop? True story, not exactly, but it's kind of based on this Bolivian colony story. It's loosely based on that, so I gave it a 3. Period piece, 5. Socially conscious, 5. Word of mouth, 6. Narrative, 6. It's the preemptive frontrunner. I have it at a 4.625. I'm just saying it right now. This wins Best Adapted Screenplay at the 2023 Oscars. I feel really safe on that bet. So, with that all said, that's my power rankings for Best Adapted Screenplay 1 through 16. I didn't put Avatar on there. I just didn't, Avatar 2. I just didn't see any world where it really gets a nomination for screenplay. But I guess if I have Batman and Top Gun Maverick on there, there could be. Not much to report on the Best Supporting Actor race, though the only thing I will note is Judd Hirsch seems to have jumped into the race, and Paul Dano may have slipped from my number one front runner. We'll see when the movie comes out. I'm hearing Judd Hirsch is barely in this movie, and Paul Dano is more. We'll see what ends up happening, but that is the one big report that I have, where Paul Dano has slipped as the front runner in this, but I still think he's a really good chance to get nominated, though Judd Hirsch maybe is coming for that thing, for that role. Maybe this film, The Fabelman, gets Chu nomination for Best Supporting Actor. We shall see. I'm very excited for that movie. With that all said, guys, thank you for listening to this episode of Best Adapted Screenplay. I'll be back next week with some more Oscar power ranking. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to the Beniverse. Thank you all so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.